we are. Okay.
You good?
Then I'm up first.
Yeah, first.
Thanks so much. I think usually we do this.
Yeah.
That's good. All right.
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for coming out. I'm always like 3 minutes before I'm like, no one's going to show up.
I done a lot of these and usually don't have this kind of response. But we got Craig Maud in the house tonight, which is exciting, all the way here from Japan. And I've admired Craig a long time and have had the good fortune to be his friend now for 10, 15 years, somewhere in that zone.
Something like that, yeah.
And I've also been very lucky to take walks with him, both in this city and in Tokyo. And yeah, he's just a wonderful guy. And I, as a fan of his, I was so looking forward to this book. You know, I really was. But I think I had like a boxed in idea of what it was going to be, you know? Like I'll like write, Craig could like go down to the convenience store, you know, to get a coffee, and I'd read an essay about that experience. And I thought that was kind of be like a kind of straightforward Craig travelogue in Japan. And I was really astonished when I read the book, kind of how much is in this. I don't know, has anyone read it in here? Okay, we got a few. Yeah, this is like a grief memoir, you know, it's a philosophy of walking. It's a kind of soul level critique of American culture and why one might want to leave it. And it's written in just really beautiful language. Anyway, it's an achievement. I'm excited to dig into it with Craig tonight. I know that Craig, well, in DC, and kind of any city worth mentioning, there's a big Craig Maud fandom. And I want to make sure that some of you all get to ask some questions. And so he and I will go between kind of 30 and 40 minutes, and then I'll open it up to the larger crowd. Craig, congratulations, man.
Thanks.
I want to talk about Bryan. I want to open up talking about Bryan. As I said, I had first thought this book was kind of a travelogue. And in fact, it's a grief memoir, and it's really epistolary, which is to say that it's sort of directed at this character, Bryan, not a character, a friend from your formative years. And I just hope that you could sort of talk about why you thought to structure the book that way, and also tell us a little bit about what was going on in your life in 2021 when you started writing this book, and what kind of called Bryan back to your mind.
Yeah, so, you know, this book, I'm sure some of you have been following along. You know, this book has been through many stages. I started it essentially on the walk. The walk that became this book began exactly 4 years ago tomorrow, so May 10th, 2021. So it was the height of COVID. Everything was shut down. Japan was basically Edo era closed. No one could enter. If you left, you couldn't come back. So I was kind of stuck there. But I loved it. I really loved it. I was able to, I wanted to stop moving for a long time. You know, there's this kind of momentum that life picks up, and you know, in 2020 I had, I think, 11 international trips planned, and then suddenly it was all shut down. It was all closed. And for me, I think I needed that kind of third party, that almost like natural intervention to happen. And then that was when I started working on Kisa by Kisa, and had that book come out, and then a lot of momentum came out of that. And I think I drew a lot of kind of permission and, I don't know, just excitement about that energy. And so I did a walk when Biden and Trump were going through the election bit. And I had a rule where I was like, no news, no social media. And my theory was that I'd be walking, my walk started like a week before the election, and the election would happen, and then some farmer would yell to me the results. I just had this, idea, because we were all so obsessed with it.
Yeah.
And no one in Japan yelled me the results. And so finally, you know, a week after the election, I said, what's going on? I texted someone, you know, I texted my friend Sam. So I was kind of doing those things, and then the walk 4 years ago was, I wanted to go back to this peninsula that I've been visiting for years and years and years. I've been many times, and this was a walk where I was trying to connect all these disparate paths that I'd previously walked and kind of do them all linearly to a certain degree. And so the world was just, there's a quietude to that stage. You know, and Japan was counting, you know, how many cases of COVID and all that. And like Mie Prefecture, this is a peninsula south of Kyoto and Osaka. So Mie and Wakayama and Nara. And, you know, Mie had like 3 cases. It was just a strange energy.
Yeah.
But we were all really, really concerned. And I was testing, and I was making sure I was careful, and I was like, oh, let me go on this walk. And so it was in this landscape of real surprise, like extra silence. It's already a pretty quiet peninsula because of depopulation, aging population, things like that. But 2021, it was extra silent. I think every inn I stayed at, I was the only guest, and all the cafes and restaurants had signs on them that said, "We don't accept out of prefecture customers." So it was a weird energy. And so it was just in the middle of that, and I was doing my pop-up newsletter for that walk, that I started essentially drafting what became this book. But it went through another whole drafting sequence. I thought I was going to finish this in 21 days. So I did the walk, came out of the walk with about 60,000 words. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to take these 50,000 words, I'm going to turn them into a book, and I need to do that quickly. I need deadlines. And so I set this deadline of 21 days, and I started a newsletter called Nightingale and Gale that was going to document it. It was, diary, every day for 21 days, I'm going to write about what I did, and the book will be done. And I just sent out issue 298 or something out of 21. But during the process of kind of revisiting the source material and then turning it into kind of book form, I had one reader, Ali Chance, who's an old friend from college, and he's an incredible translator and writer. He was reading drafts, and Bryan was starting to sneak in. So he wasn't present explicitly in the pop-up newsletter because it is so personal. So Bryan was basically, I'm adopted, I'm an only child. You want brothers and sisters when you're a kid, And so Bryan, we met in first grade, and we just fused, as kids can do sometimes. It was just, okay, this is my person. I love this guy. And all through elementary school, we were just totally fused. And then you start testing, and if you test better, you go into a slightly different section of the world, of certain places. And my town was not well funded, and there's a lot of struggling. And if you didn't test well, you kind of ended up in this more dangerous area. The whole place was to a certain degree dangerous. And we were kind of cleaved by the system apart. And then when we graduated high school, a week after we graduated, he was at some party, got in a fight, and was murdered. He and this other kid. And so we were 17, we just graduated. Life is, oh my God, we're done with high school. Can't wait. Let's go out and be adults. And he's finished just like that in such a stupid situation. And when I was 17, I didn't have the tools or the people in my life to process that with. And I, in that moment, just lost half of essentially my childhood heart. All these memories that I won't be able to access because it would be through conversation with him that they would come out. And I think for many years I tried to write. The first short story I ever published was actually a short story about Bryan. And so I was trying to go there, I didn't know how to. And 25 years passed, and I was 4 years ago doing this walk. And I think it was in that silence, the concoction of COVID, the stillness of all that I finally felt like, okay, maybe I can revisit this. And then Ali, who was that reader, was saying, Craig, this is, Bryan is poking out here. And that's what I want to know about. I want to know about Bryan. So he really helped draw that out for me.
One of the lovely things about that is that your relationship to Bryan serves both as a kind of a spider web that you can kind of attach other relationships that you had during your childhood to. So it kind of works, Bryan works as like a real vehicle to kind of excavate your life when you were younger, but also, which had many difficulties, as you say, and which the relationships you had then were not ones that you wanted to reproduce in your later life. And so the other nice thing about this book is it's also about the kind of relationships that you've been able to form since. And I wonder, as Bryan was kind of emerging as a stronger theme in this book, when did you start to realize that he would be kind of the map to all these other relationships?
It only happened after I finished one version of the book. So it was, my Random House deal is unique in that 2 years ago when we inked it, I was in the middle of producing the fine art edition because I didn't think anyone was going to want to buy this. So I just decided, all of my life I've been working in indie publishing and doing fine art books. And I just know how to do that. And I have relationships with printers, and I have a distribution network. It's very easy for me to do that to a certain degree. And so I was deep in producing the fine art edition. And then Random House said, hey, we love it, we want it. And I said, well, you can have it if you let me keep fine art. And they were like, well, hold on, give us a couple days to think about that. And we were able, look, the fine art edition's $100, yours is gonna be 25, with discounts on Amazon or whatever. We're not competing. And so they let me do that. And I put out the fine art edition 18 months ago. And I didn't realize that finishing that, completing that, and then, there's a kind of tension that you can have when you're writing certain things. And by doing that, I was like, okay, well, I got the version out that I wanted to get out. This is kind of like minimalist. We really pared it down. There's almost no characters in it except for me and Bryan. And Bryan doesn't, the epistolary component of this book doesn't appear until the last, say, 30 pages of the fine art edition. And going back and working with Molly Turpin, my editor at Random House, and our kind of strategy was she went through that edition and asked questions throughout the whole thing. So she littered the manuscript with like 300-400 questions. And then to get to this version, I was responding to all those questions. And then also going back to that, having given it 6 months, 7 months of kind of space, the energy of the last 30 pages that turned to Bryan, I just said, this is crazy. What if we obviously pull this up? It's like Annie Dillard. It's like don't save anything, right? Don't, if you have something good, put that in the front. So I pulled up the entire framing of the book from the fine art one where it kind of tiptoes towards Bryan, and then the last 30 pages turn towards him, to the first page of this book is Bryan. And it's a story of Bryan. And then in being able to do that, because he's foregrounded, I'm able to bring in these other relationships without it diluting Bryan.
Right.
So the whole thing can be talking to, explaining kind of the memoir component of it as a letter to essentially this friend who I've lost and now I'm catching up with for the first time in 25 years.
Yeah. During that time in your childhood when you were in this environment that you've come to see as being deeply flawed, you were anxious to get out. And eventually, and I'll let you tell the story, it's not my story to tell, but you decided to kind of up and move to Japan, and this is more than 20 years ago now. And I wonder, having had kind of many versions of sort of youthful naivete myself, like, what was your image of Japan at that time? Like, where did you think you were going? And you have this great detail in the book where you talk about seeing a Nintendo cartridge, like a Zelda cartridge, and it saying "Made in Japan" on it, and this having this kind of futuristic glamour to it. But talk about, like, what did Japan represent to you?
Almost nothing. I mean, it really was. I had no, I grew up in a very sort of inward-looking place, so there's no international element to anything. And like you say, Nintendo was everything to me as a kid, and for Bryan as well, and it was our escape. And I think, video games are great at this. If you're in a situation you don't like being in, you can escape into this kind of virtual world. Books work that way too. Video games are maybe even more accessible. And so for me, it just represented this place that created a thing that I loved, that was so dear to me. One of my earliest memories, this is a psychotic memory to have, but Super Mario 2 was coming out, and my parents, I was adopted, and then my parents divorced almost immediately. It's like kind of bizarre that they decided to adopt and then split. And then I was coming home, my dad was driving me back after a Saturday after Burger King, eating at Burger King with him. We were driving back over the Connecticut River, and I just remember it was Christmas Eve or something, and I was just going, Mario Madness, Mario Madness. It's like, I was just so excited to get this game. I know we were gonna get this game for Christmas. So it was this beacon of joy from this place that was far away. And I managed to somehow subscribe to a video game magazine from Japan. Somehow, and it came, and I thought it was going to be in English for some reason. It was obviously not in English, it was in Japanese. And so it was this mysterious place that was kind of interesting. And through random chance, I was raised by my grandparents and my mom, and everyone sort of worked at the airplane engine factory in town. My mom was an elementary school teacher, and everyone just saved. And when I was 13, 14, my grandparents had this sort of bizarre desire to go to Hawaii. And in 1993, this is the height of the Japanese bubble, Japan owned Waikiki. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the history and how Waikiki, sort of the ownership has shifted, but in the early 90s, everyone was worried Japan was going to buy everything. It was buying golf courses all over the world, buying movie studios. And so we landed in Waikiki on some extremely cheap package deal, like everything inclusive, for a week. And it was essentially like visiting Japan. It was very mind-blowing because it was 50-60% Japanese people from Japan, like real Japanese. My town is really diverse, the place I come from, but everyone's sort of first generation, second generation. It's a big mix with Vietnamese and Laotian, Indian, Puerto Rican. It was just like this really interesting melting pot. But to go to Waikiki in '93, it was like visiting Japan. Anyway, that really stuck in my mind as these people are really interesting. I went golfing. In America, you can golf on public courses for $5 for 18 holes. And so I went to go golfing in Hawaii, and they don't let you do it alone as a 14-year-old. And so they paired me up with two Japanese businessmen. So I'm 14, and it's these two 40-year-olds. They could have been 28 for all I know, but they felt 40 to me. And they're asking me things like, "Are you married?" And I was just like, "Who are these guys?" And they were super sweet, and I said, "Teach me how to say hello." And they taught me like the longest possible way you could say hello. And one of them had a hat on that it said WHOOF. I said, "Do you know what that means?" He goes, "I don't know. I don't know what I just bought this random hat." And it had WHOOF, and then the second line, ARTED. And if you read it together, it said, "Who farted?" And I was just like, who are these people? They were so nice, and it was so bizarre. And I think that also stuck in mind. When I was 19 and I was thinking about dropping out of school, and I was looking for, okay, what can I do? What are certain options? I looked at Japanese universities because I wanted to study abroad, and I thought it'd be more interesting to go to Asia, kind of as a challenge. And it was cheap. I think it was like $5,000 for the whole year with a homestay or something, and you easily get a scholarship. And I was just like, oh yeah, why wouldn't I go do this for a year and see how that goes? And so I did, 19.
I was going to ask you how your sort of thinking about Japan has changed in the time since, but that's like the subject of 10 books. So why don't I narrow the question just a little bit and ask you, you've come to know Japan to like a really uncommon depth, I think, for a Westerner. Like I've walking around Tokyo with Craig, it's funny because you'll go to like a little market or something, and someone will be like kind of like messing with groceries, and their back will be turned, and Craig will ask them a question in Japanese, and then they'll turn around and see him and just be astonished. And so you've got to know this culture really well. And what, I guess, your image of it, how is it different than the image that most Americans have of Japan today?
It's not futuristic at all. that's like the big, everyone thinks Blade Runner, and it's just so hopelessly not technologically that competent, really, interestingly. There's a lot of things they were really, really ahead of the curve on. But I think, in like 1985, Japan felt like it was living in the year 2000. And then today, it still feels like Japan's living in the year 2000. So it's this sort of bizarre set of contradictions. And the reason when I landed at 19, I think what I felt intuitively that really kept me there, or made me think maybe I should spend more time there, was, I'm commuting from my homestay family's house to school, and I'm passing through Shinjuku Station, which is the biggest station, I think, in the world in terms of passengers. And I'm passing tens of thousands of people every day. And I just had this sense that people were taken care of. This ambient sense, like, I'd never felt that before, people being taken care of. Because a lot of thinking back on my town and where we grew up, everyone was suffering. Everyone was like just barely scraping by. This neighbor just tried to kill himself. This guy's an alcoholic. This friend's sister is pregnant. Oh, that person's pregnant. Oh, this person, got shot or whatever. This guy's in jail. It was a sense of no one was there to kind of protect us. And then I go to the city, this giant, massive machine of a city that's bigger than anywhere I've been in my life. And all I can feel is this ambient sense of everyone I'm passing can't fall that far. Of course, it took me like 20 years to realize that's what I was feeling, but that was a pretty profound thing to feel. And I think it made me want to explore, and it made me feel safe and protected, and like that was a place where I felt like I didn't have the archetypes or the resources to rebuild myself in the way I wanted to, or to become the person I wanted to become back where I came from. And it felt like Japan, even though it would never accept me, I'd never become part of Japan fully, there was a foundation there, and the cost of living was so low that there was a freedom out of all that felt potent and exciting. And that's why I ended up spending my 20s there. Just felt like a good place to do that.
Yeah, it seems to have worked out. This walk that you take in this book takes place on a peninsula, and I was going to try to pronounce it, but there's like a big riff in the book about like pronouncing it and screwing it up. So I'm going to let you do it. Key, but like with the extra. See, tell him though. Tell him the trick.
It's got two eyes. It's got two eyes.
Yeah.
So you elongate it a little.
There's this pilgrimage route, right? The Kumano-Kodo pilgrimage route. And it's one of two in the world that have UNESCO World Heritage designation as like pilgrimage routes. The other one being, of course, the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And Craig is one of the very few people, you actually get a button if you pull this off, who's done both. And I was hoping that, as someone who's now thought deeply about pilgrimages and what goes into a good pilgrimage, if you could kind of compare and contrast them for us.
Yeah, I got the badge. I'm on the website. If you search the website for dual pilgrims, I'm on the dual pilgrim website. That was a very exciting moment. But actually, I didn't walk the full French Camino. You only have to walk 100, like 100K of it. So I feel like I'm a little bit of a charlatan.
Yeah.
I didn't do the full,
Stolen valor.
the full Camino. But I went to do the Camino, parts of it, and I was really suspicious of it because it is so popular. You know, and there's that terrible Martin Sheen movie, The Way, where Emilio Estevez dies on the first day of the Camino. And I've walked the day that he died on, and I mean, you just have to be terrible at walking to die on. So it's just a weird movie. It's such a bizarre movie, and then someone keeps yelling, "You're a boomer! You're a boomer!" So, like to one of the characters. It's so bizarre. So I had this image of it just being terrible and Disneyland-esque and kind of overly scrubbed and not really having that much juice to it. And you know, I started in French. I walked over the Pyrenees, and I did basically 120, 30K of that, the first bit of it, and it was just magic, man. It was magic. And no matter how popular or, you know, how many books, you know, everyone's kind of, I think, everyone's telling me that it's more popular than ever now. It's kind of popping up on TikTok and, you know, social media more and more. But it takes 5 weeks to do the whole thing. To do something like that, to set off on something like that, and to commit to it, doesn't matter how scrubbed the path is. That's a huge undertaking. And you feel it, and everyone feels like you're part of this incredible, bizarre family where you don't know anyone, but you're all doing the same thing. You're all moving towards the same goal. And I left, you know, I'd only scheduled that first 120K or so, and I left. I had to extract myself from it because I was going to meet Kevin Kelly, and we were walking the Portuguese way, so the last 110K from the Portuguese border up to Santiago. And I was heartbroken. I didn't want to leave. I was really crestfallen. I was like, oh my God, I just want to stay. I want to keep doing this. So that was a shock. And then Kevin Kelly and I, we did another walk and talk just 2 months ago, and we walked the last 110, 20K of the French Camino. So now I've walked the first 120, the last 120, and even the last 120, which is the most touristic. It's the bit that everyone kind of just goes to and walks, because you can get the pin if you do, if you do that bit. But even that bit was pretty good. So I'd say if you're thinking about doing a pilgrimage or doing any of these walks, the Camino, and if you can do the full Camino, do it and do it alone, because it's really constructed for the solo walker, and you're going to meet people, and it's going to be incredible. Now, like the Camino de Santiago, Camino Kodo, also, it's not one route, right? So when people talk about the Camino, they're 99.9% of the time talking about the French Camino. And when people talk about Camino Kodo, they're mainly talking about this route called the Nakahechi, which is just one tiny bit of Camino Kodo. But the whole thing is, it sort of spiders out from Hongu, this area, this shrine, Hongu Taisha, Hongu Grand Shrine. Like the Santiago, also everything kind of spirals out from Santiago. So there's the Portuguese route, there's the English route, there's the French route, there's a northern route. There's all these different routes to the Camino de Santiago. And so like that, the Camino is sort of similarly complicated. And it took me years to kind of understand and to sort of hold in my mind what all these different routes were, which is part of what this walk was about, connecting a lot of those disparate bits. But when people talk about I walked Kumano Kodo, they're really most of the time saying they walked Nakahechi. And the big difference is you know, the Camino is full of all these villages, ancient villages, tiny villages with these incredible cathedrals that took generations to build, that have been there for 1,000 years. And Japan is all about wood, and wood just disappears. And a lot of Japan is about rebuilding. And so you don't have that ancient village component on the Kumano. And it's much more animistic and sort of in conversation with nature itself. So a lot of the shrines are shrines to a waterfall, to a rock in the mountain, things like that. And so those objects have been there for millennia. But the structures of the shrines themselves, the inns you stay in, the towns you visit, it doesn't quite have that same epic historical resonance that you get on the Camino.
Huh. Yeah. You talk about all the sort of the long tradition of pilgrimages in Japan, and like in thinking about what previous pilgrims had written about those journeys, like how did you think about yourself sort of in conversation with them?
In 300 years ago, 400 years ago, if you wanted to travel in Japan, it was actually quite complicated. You needed a passport. You know, the daimyo and there are the domains, and everyone's kind of it was a lot of civil war happening. And then post-Civil War, everyone was sort of worried about more civil war happening. So it was fairly strict to go on a trip if you wanted to go on a trip. And so the easiest way to go was say you wanted to do a pilgrimage. And anyone, if you had the money to do it, they would kind of let you go.
Yeah.
So a lot of the old routes in Japan are these pilgrimage routes. And I'm not interested in walking, say, the Appalachian Trail. That's not interesting, because I want to talk to people, I want to meet people, I want to see lives being lived. That's really important to me. And so the cool thing about these pilgrimage trails is because they were so frequently walked. They were the highways of Japan. There is this, all of the main, cities and a lot of, mid-sized cities today that remain are along these routes. And a lot of villages, and there's a lot of, especially on the Kii Peninsula, you get a lot of fishing villages, lumber villages. There's a lot of working class, kind of blue collar energy to the routes. And so you get that spiritual component, but you also get to meet people that feel like, they're embedded in the land themselves. And so for me, that's critical. It's not just about going into the mountains and doing some kind of mountain ascetic training or something like that, which I've done and is kind of interesting. But it's really, every day I want to talk to, a dozen people if I can. And even if it's just a hello or short conversation or whatever it might be. One of my things is that I try to take a portrait of someone by 10 in the morning. And so if it's 9:45, I'm sort of, I have all these rules that no one's holding me to, but I have a covenant with myself. And it'll be 9:45, and it's just a good forcing function to yell out to a farmer, "Hey, can I take your picture?" Or knock on someone's door, or open a tatami shop, knock and see if they're getting going in the morning yet, and to start that conversation, take that photo, and catalyze the energy that comes from connecting with a stranger, that then infuses the rest of the day. It's such a powerful thing to feel that.
As I mentioned at the top, this book kind of doubles as a sort of Thoreauvian philosophy of walking, and I want to read one very short passage in particular. So, Craig says, "There's no quieter place on earth than the third hour of a good long day of walking. It's alone in this space, this walk-induced hypnosis, that the mind is finally able to receive the strange gifts and charities of this world." I wanted to know, Craig, at what point in your walking life that really clicked in for you, and also how that experience kind of compares to, known you a long time, when you've kind of experimented with various types of meditation. Like, what do these things have in common? How are they different?
Yeah, I mean, I had all, when I moved to Japan, I spent many a night very drunk walking around Tokyo. And I think that was when I started to notice that there was something potent about the walking. Yeah. But it took me a long, long time for it to be formalized in any kind of real way. And I had to kick alcohol in my late 20s as well to get to that place. And it was really through my friend John McBride, who's this Australian guy. He's long history with Japan. He's been connected to it for 40 plus years. He was the CEO of Sky TV in the 90s. When he was 34, I think he became CEO. Kind of this real magical, pulsing brain, but also so generous and such a beautiful guy. And we connected because I did an art book about the Tokyo art world. And he was sort of involved with the art world. He's gifted many pieces to galleries around the world, and he catalyzed the whole, when Aboriginal art in the early 2000s was making its way around the world. This is all sort of John McBride behind the scenes making this happen. And we connected, we sat down for breakfast about 17, 18 years ago, and we didn't get up till yesterday, basically. So we didn't stand up until 5 p.m. or something. They ended up kicking us out because they had to get ready for dinner. And it was just one of those immediate, okay, this guy, we get each other. It was really nice. And so he started inviting me to the peninsula. He's the one who, I had never heard of Kumano-Kodo. I didn't know anything about these pilgrimage routes. I was about 31, I think, when I was first invited. And I spent a couple years just walking with John. We'd spend a few months a year walking together, just the two of us, and doing these routes. And he was kind of doing research. He works with this company, Walk Japan, and a lot of Walk Japan's routes, Shikoku Pilgrimage, the Setonaikai route, the Okino Hosomichi Basho route, a lot of the Kumano-Kodo stuff. John sort of built those walks and helped establish them for Walk Japan, to help build those relationships. And so I was watching John kind of do this work, and he studied tea ceremony for 40 years. And, his classmates became like prime ministers. I mean, it's this level of almost like Forrest Gumpian life that this guy's lived. And so watching him talk to these farmers in sort of tea ceremony Japanese, which is pretty elevated, but just using these phrases that no one has ever used on these farmers before, and watching them kind of flip over the swing set of disbelief and just fall in love and want to help us immediately switch from being circumspect of us or suspicious of us to John just deploying historical fact and doing it in such a way, in such an elevated way with so much respect, to them becoming total allies, like in just minutes. And so I watched that for years before then I thought, okay, let me try walking on my own. And then it was walking on my own where I thought, okay, this is, something interesting is happening here where I can't access this place when I'm with John, and or when I'm with anyone. And so I just started riffing from there. I think the first big walk I did on my own was 2016, which I did right after a Vipassana retreat. So I went and did a 10-day Vipassana because someone invited me to this talk by some guy named Yuval Harari and at Stanford like 12 years ago. And they said, oh, you should come. This guy's going to give a little talk. We invited him. And I was in a room with like 10 people and Yuval. And he comes out and he's like laser beam brilliance. I was like, who is this guy? And I looked him up. And he does 2 months of Vipassana a year. 2 months every year. And I just thought, okay, if this guy who's Obama's singing his praises about his book and all this stuff, if he can find in his life 2 months of time to go do this, I can find 10 days. Because I had been putting it off for a long time. And so finally in 2016, I did it. And it was pretty profound to sit for 100 hours over 10 days and sit and focus your attention, scan your body, and just think about how the physiology of emotion kind of happens before the psychology of it. And so and becoming good, really attuned to what you're feeling in your body when you're feeling it, and short-circuiting those physical sensations from going straight to the brain and causing you to react. So basically, Vipassana is almost like this training ground where you're using your body as the sitting for 100 hours as this kind of training ground to have an experience, have an emotion, and then say, wait a minute, okay, I want to make sure my response to this is aligned with my goals, instead of just letting yourself respond to the physicality. So I had just done that, and then I set off, and I think I did 8 days. That was my big walk on the Kumano Kodo, going back to routes I'd done before. And so I was in that mindset, and so the two sort of began to merge, yeah.
Huh. I want to make sure that there is time for other folks to ask questions. So I'm going to ask one more question and then turn it over to all of you. It seems to me that, at least in these last 10 years, you've become sort of an expert on the qualia of walks. And I wondered if you'd tell us kind of how an 8-day walk differs from like a 2-week walk, differs from a 30-day walk, and then culminating in this 40-day adventure.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing with like Vipassana. I've had a lot of people ask me, can I just do 3 days? Can I do 4 days? And I'm sure Yuval would say you have to do 2 months to really get to the special place. But the 10 days, for example, in Vipassana, the 10 days you spend the first 2 or 3 days struggling, angry, going through information withdrawal, smartphone withdrawal, frustrated, confused. And then it's not until day 5, 6, 7 that you finally arrive and that you really start to get control over your attention. And you start to have these really trippy moments where your body kind of breaks into particulate matter. I mean, it's really, really sort of trippy, some of the places you get to. But you only get to those places on day 7, 8. And then by day 9, you're thinking about, well, tomorrow's the last day, and you start to be pulled out of the moment. So in order to get to that 2 or 3 days of really special time, you need 10 days. There's an entry and an exit kind of tax. It was amazing, the coming out of it, by the way. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps actually now, just thinking about how it felt to have made it through. And then also looking around and seeing people who, the group clearly was cleaved into two. One group got it and embraced the experience. Another group just sat in the frustrated state the entire time. And they just wanted to complain about, the food wasn't good enough, or this wasn't good enough, or why they did this badly, or this badly. Anyway, it was sort of interesting to step back almost like a bodhisattva and just be like, oh yeah, that's the wrong path. You've taken the wrong path. One guy who annoyed everybody, he annoyed everyone, shaved his head in the field. I did this in Kyoto, and it was some very stinky man, young man. He was 22. Vipassana is free, so you can get these hippie folks. Anyway, he shaved his head in the field, and then it was the last day. He shaved his head in the field, out of view of everyone, and we're eating our final meal in the dining room, and we're all, the joy was just so elevated. It was incredible. I mean, it was really, really special. And this Japanese guy comes in, and we're eating, and he walks over to the young guy who'd shaved his head. He was sitting in front of me, and he had collected all of his hair, and he just put it on his plate. And you were just like, wow, man, people really held in some crazy emotions. It was like the most violent thing I'd ever seen happen in my life. And we were all just, in this blissful shock. Anyway, so you need that. And doing the kind of walks that I do, so for example, I've walked the Nakasendo and Tokaido a few times. And what you'll see is a lot of the people who walk the Tokaido, it's from Tokyo to Kyoto. It's about 600 kilometers or so. You can, slow. You can do it slow in a month. What a lot of people do is they do it when they're retired, and they do it weekend by weekend. So 2 days, 2 days, 2 days, and they go and they leave and they go, come and then they pick it up. And fine, do that if you want. But the real quality is doing it for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and then having this rigor that you commit to, which for me is I'll do 20, 30, 40K of walking a day, and then I get to the inn, and I'll do 3, 4, 5 hours of writing and photo editing every night. And you just do that day after day, and you don't think you're going to be able to do it. And actually, the last chapter in this book was written on the last day. The draft of it was written on the last day of the big walk I do in this book. And I got to the inn, I think it was like a 45K day. I got to the inn, the hotel, I was just destroyed. And it was like 11 p.m., and I had to start writing at 11 p.m. And I just, okay, I've committed to this, I'm going to do this. And it's my favorite chapter in the book. And I don't think I could have gotten to that place without that commitment, and also that weird relationship between using your body up completely during the day and then going to these kind of reserves to use the mind at the end of the day. And then getting in bed at the end of all of that and just feeling how much fullness can be wrested from a single day. And that's kind of what I've learned probably the most out of doing these walks. I've had hundreds of these days of just extreme total fullness, like where the hand I was dealt in the morning, there couldn't have been a richer way to play it. And to get in bed and feel that day after day is a pretty powerful thing. And then you're able to, like the Vipassana, in the same way you control your attention, you can bring that feeling of fullness back to a normal day. And try to get a little, eke a little more out. But it's hard to do that if you're just doing a weekend and then going back to your real life and then doing another weekend of walking and then kind of extracting yourself. So there's something about that continuousness of it and the continuous offlineness of it, which is also pretty critical. So being disconnected from the teleportation that our smartphones are so good at. So forcing you to be present, forcing you to be bored, sit with that boredom, sit with the physical pain of the boredom and kind of psychic pain as well.
We've got a moving mic somewhere. There it is, right there. Yeah, any questions? Raise your hand.
So going on that theme you were just talking about, are you able, or what is your practice for reflecting back on those full days? So where I'm going with this is that since you're doing them back to back, right? So if you're doing them for 40 days, how do you think about, or how do you teleport back to day 20 or the experiences of day 18 at some point in your life? Because otherwise it's just, those days are so rich and so full. What does that look like?
Well, I think this is why it's critical to have this practice every night of writing and reviewing the photographs. And it's gotten a little complicated because now I'm shooting mostly film, so the photographic loop is a little longer, it's a little more extended. But that's why you do the writing in that moment. And I'm dictating for most of the day as I'm walking. I can't stop myself from writing, essentially. So when I take away the teleportation, the social networks, the news, all these things that kind of take you out of the moment, my brain just fills that void with writing. It's just writing, thinking about things or reflecting on things. Or if I have a conversation with someone, there's almost this like heightened super taster sense of like interestingness about what people are saying. And so then you forget these things very quickly. Very quickly. If you've ever done field work, sort of design, ethnography field work, I've done some research in Myanmar, and I was out there, trying to basically see how they were going to use smartphones, because they had just been given smartphones, and farmers had just gotten smartphones, and we were trying to figure out how can we, I was working with an NGO about disseminating farming techniques and information and education in real time through smartphones so they could get better yields, things like that. And I lived out there in Myanmar in the countryside for a month. And one of the things I learned, and this is why I think the pop-ups I started doing this, and this was in 2015, 2016. I wrote a piece for The Atlantic about this, actually, the Myanmar smartphone people, was that you learned anything you were observing in the field, get that down as fast as possible. You're going to lose it. If you wait till tomorrow, you've lost it. And so someone else asked me, like, is this writing or this capturing desire at odds with living in the moment? And I'd say it's in conversation with it, and it enhances it. And if I wasn't doing the pop-ups, I'm really glad I started doing them when I started doing the big walks, because I wouldn't be able to remember anything from these old walks. And having that resource to go back to, and now if you're a member of my membership program, all of the pop-up archives are there. So you could go back and you could read the pop-up for this book, actually, and then read the fine art edition, and then read this edition if you want to be like really crazy about how do you get to this place with it. But there's I think there's like 400,000 or 500,000 words in that archive now. And without that, I wouldn't be able to revisit these things. So I have walks I've done in Tokyo, I have walks I've done in 10 cities around Japan, and the plan is to turn those into books. And by having that archive, I feel like I can go do that. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I've been reading a lot of haiku of late, and so I'm curious to what extent do you view your work as in competition with haiku? And to some extent, it looks to me like you have the travel sketches and you have images instead of poems. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, like Matsuo Basho is the grandfather of haiku, and he was a famous walker. I mean, he's really kind of who established this literary tradition of walking and writing, and being in the moment. And his haikus are, sort of like photographs in a way. These little moments. He wrote tens of thousands of them, and so Oku no Hosomichi, and the diary of his apprentice is something that John translated, and so I have that as my archive in my archives as well. And I draw a lot of inspiration from their work. The days and the opening of Oku no Hosomichi is really poetic. God, this is something I should definitely have off memory. But if you search for it, the opening of the narrow road to the deep north, the first few sentences are so beautiful. And I mean, this is hundreds of years ago. This guy's setting this tone of how to do travel writing and how to think about doing those sketches in real time. And I definitely draw on that, I think, in my work as well. Thanks.
So obviously the Japanese don't just accept, but also kind of embrace this idea of impermanence and letting things go so that you can welcome more in. And of course that's clear from the title of the book. And I'm just curious if that's something that slowly crept in or something you embraced right away, and how it's kind of changed you as an artist and as an explorer and a wanderer.
Yeah, so one of the big examples of embracing impermanence is Issei Shrine, which is one of the most important shrines, if not the most important shrine in Japan. And it's really a shrine complex. There's hundreds of sub-shrines. But Issei is famous because every 20 years they knock it down and rebuild it next to itself. So it just keeps shifting 20 meters this way, build the new one, keep the old one up. They sit side by side for 6 months. And you can see they're built out of hinoki cedar. And hinoki cedar kind of ages in this really beautiful way with a nice patina. And you can kind of see the old and the new next to each other for 6 months. And then they tear it down. And then 20 years later, they do the same thing. And they've been doing this for millennia. So it's kind of amazing. Like the Colosseum has been there as the Colosseum was when the Romans were running around. But maybe recently we figured out how to make the concrete. I think that was something that you guys wrote about. We figured out Roman concrete finally. But that was like this mystery. We didn't know how they made their concrete for thousands of years. Whereas Issei, every 20 years, you're having 3 generations work together to rebuild. And so this carpentry, this knowledge is being passed down kind of in real time. And there's something, to me, far more profound about being able to keep that going for 2,000 years without losing the knowledge. So that's interesting. That's just interesting to feel. And to not be like, well, how old is this building? How old is this church? How old, you kind of step back from that and you just think, okay, why this rock? What's special about this place? And you kind of think more about power spots and energy, actually. I mean, Koyasan is this, also in the book, it's this incredible, almost sort of lotus configuration of mountain peaks. And the Koyasan area is in the center of it, and that's where Shingon Buddhism established itself 1,200 years ago. Kukai, the head priest who established that, built that there. And you go there, and I mean, 1,200 years ago, to get to that spot would have been impossible. I mean, just this peninsula is so fecund and rich and wet and disgusting, and the leeches, like the mountains are not friendly, and the boars and the bears and everything. You really have to want to get to that spot, and to think about them doing this work to build this incredible infrastructure. And the cemetery up there is just unbelievable. And to go up there and walk through it, you realize why they picked that spot. You just feel that. And I think Japan has made me sensitive to that in ways that maybe Western classics and things like that didn't.
How have your rules for walking changed as you've done these walks? And are there any rules that you've discarded as not being as helpful for the meditative aspect?
So my main rules have kind of stayed the same, and I started building up the no internet rule about 15, 16 years ago. I wrote something for a magazine, a publication called The Manual, that was about, and this would have been 2010, and it was about turning the internet off when you go to bed, so around like 10 p.m., turn the internet off, and don't turn it back on until after lunch. And I wrote about how that felt so radical in 2010, and how lunch would, the mornings would be so quiet, and that was when I was able to do what I felt was real work and real focused work. And then lunch would roll around, and I could feel like my brain was a bowl of goldfish and the guppies, and they're just waiting for the dopamine to be dropped down from Twitter and whatever, and Tech Meme and Hacker News or whatever the heck I was reading. And I think understanding that, the power of that, helped me get quickly to the no internet, no social media, no news on the walks. And the first walk I did, I actually had no real-time feedback. I built this SMS system, so instead of using email, I built this weird, complicated, expensive, it was because you have to pay to send SMSs, system where you could subscribe, and then every day at the end of the day I'd send you a little SMS and a photo, and you could reply, and I didn't see any of the responses. They were all put in a database that was hidden from me. And so I'm kind of walking blind. I don't know how many people are subscribed to it. I don't know how many people are responding to any of this stuff. And at the end, I hired a designer, and I just had my friend send him the database, and I said, okay, lay out a book. Here's my little things I sent, here's my photos, lay out a book with all the responses in, and have that, we'll print one copy, a blurb book. It'll be waiting for me when I get home from the walk. And we did that. And that project, which was 6 years ago, right about now, is kind of what set in motion everything else with the book stuff. Because I got home, and this beautiful book was waiting for me. And I opened it up, and it was hundreds of pages long. And it was just thousands of these responses. And because I told everyone I wasn't going to see it in real time, and because I told everyone it was going to be anonymous, I wasn't going to know who was who, the confession quality of these notes was really astounding. And but things like, my mother died yesterday, and reading, following along and knowing where you are, whatever was powerful to me this morning. Things like that. It wasn't like people admitting to murder or anything like that, but it was this other level of kind of profundity that giving these people, and saying, look, this isn't going to be a real-time conversation, I think unlocked a kind of intimacy, paradoxically, this kind of intimacy that you don't get in real time on Twitter or Instagram and things like that. So experiments like that, playing around with publishing like that, just made me think more and more about the power of those rules. And so then establishing, no news, no SNS. What are my other rules? The other big rules. Everything is kind of planned in advance, so I'm not doing any logistics on the fly, because logistics take up a tremendous amount of brain space. If you have to think about where am I going to stay tomorrow, a lot of these places I'm going to have only one place to stay anyway, and so if you don't book it, you're not going to get it. I just want it to be, I have spreadsheets of where I'm going to stay, if they're going to provide me with food or not, if they have laundry or not. I know the kilometers I'm going to walk each day. I have that all set up so then I don't have to think for 1 second about that, and I can just be fully present. So, the fundamental rules of being offline. The portrait rule, I kind of am a little bit flexible on. And I've done other things where I've recorded binaural audio every morning at 9:45 or 10 in the morning and done that, or I've done video. I'm kind of flexible with where you can play with them. But the fundamental rules of creating this sort of boring space for creativity to flourish in, hopefully, ideally. And again, like, you don't know if you're going to meet anyone interesting on the road. You don't know if anyone interesting is going to be out there. But having now done this hundreds of times, day after day after day, you realize if you don't find something interesting, the onus is on you. That's you failed. It wasn't the universe not providing you with something interesting. Because there's always something weird out there, no matter how boring you might think it might be.
Just reflecting on that, what is it like when you're not walking? So is there a balance? What kind of structure does that look like?
I mean, right now, it's just chaos, right? It's just total chaos. I kind of see this tour, I'm on the road for 6 weeks, which is a long time to do something. And this stuff, this is a lot of energy to do. If I normally do one of these events, I need like 3 weeks to recover. So to kind of like slam them all together, it's a different kind of ascetic practice. But I see this trip as sort of drawing on the walking practice of trying to figure it out and draw from different energy reserves. But I've found that I just am better at clumping work into chunks and saying, okay, these months are for this project, this is for this project. And then when I'm not in that space, I'm okay with being more flexible. But, these walks fundamentally are, self-imposed deadlines / forcing functions to get me to write. All throughout my 20s, I struggled with alcohol was sort of a thing I kept turning to because I didn't know where to turn. And then I really wanted to be more prolific, and I wanted to write more. I wanted to work on bigger projects. I didn't know how to. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. And just the fact that when I launched my membership program, I had this group of people who stood up, were giving me money and essentially permission to go do big walks like this. That changed the formality of it in this strange, really important way, where I felt I had a sort of ethical duty to show up, to really be there, even though no one would have cared. No one was holding me to account at all. But just having those people out there, seeing that money come in, having it be funded by this anonymous group of supporters, anonymous to me in the sense of just there are so many people out there, that was critical to believing that I could abide by the deadlines, and that I could do the walks, and that I could push through the walks, and that my feet are bleeding, my shoulders are bleeding, and I find a way to get past that and figure out how to wear the pack better, figure out how to tape my feet better. All of those things kind of came out of those deadlines and that support and drawing from that permission. And so when I'm not in the walks, I try to be gentle with myself and okay. I'm okay if I'm not as prolific as I am on the walks. My goal isn't every 30 days to write 50,000 words or 60,000 words. But there is something nice about setting those deadlines and hitting those deadlines. It's like Jerry Seinfeld and all these sort of super prolific people. They have the thing where they cross it off. They cross it off every day. I'm gonna do this thing. I'm gonna do this thing. And there's something powerful about that. So I try to just take as much of that as is gentle to my soul back from the walk. And when I feel like I'm getting weak or I feel like I'm losing my edge, it's time to set up another giant walk and go out and do it. And this is kind of part of that. And also next week, I have a new fine art book coming out on Monday, which is insane to do during this. I'm messaging with my distributor and trying to get stock set and make sure shipments are in place. But I went and I shot for 10 days on the peninsula in February because I was so worried about what I'm doing now, which I don't see. I see this is important and interesting, and I'm going to learn a lot on this tour, I'm sure. And to go out and be able to talk about this is an honor, and it's amazing that everyone has come out. But at the same time, I know this isn't the work. The work is the work. And so I got really paranoid at the beginning of the year. I just thought, oh my God, am I going to be doing any work? And I crowbarred this 10-day photographic odyssey into my schedule, and I called all these, all the people in this book essentially and said, I want to come and photograph people. Can you introduce me to, divers and truck drivers? And everyone was, delighted. They couldn't wait. Yeah, please come. We'll introduce you to everyone. I went down there and I did these days where I was getting up at 4 a.m., photographing all day, and doing it all on film, not knowing if I was really getting everything, and just wringing myself dry. And I kind of cheated. I rented a car, and it was quite nice to have the car and be able to cover all that ground. But I kind of went through, did all that, and then laid out the book in March, sequenced in March, and then we went to press in April, and it just arrived literally yesterday at the warehouse, and I'm going to announce it on Monday. But that was critical for me to do that, to stay sharp, to feel like I was staying sharp, because I am just in this state of total paranoia that I'm going to lose the edge that you get, the gift that you get from the walk. And so I'm constantly balancing that out, but also not beating myself up too much about it.
You mentioned that you take the pictures with film. I was just wondering if you've ever felt a draw to digital photography, or if there's a reason that you stay with film.
So I started on film 25 years ago when I got to Tokyo. And then I had a dark room in my apartment. I was developing. I was totally fully committed. And then digital got really good. DSLRs got really good in the mid to late 2000s. And I just shifted to that. And then I saw film as being a hindrance to creativity because it was overcomplicating things. And I just want to get to the photos. I want to edit. I want to sequence. That to me is the work. And so from basically 2007, 8, probably 2004, 5 actually, to 2 years ago, I didn't touch film at all. And it was only digital. And I was shooting Leica Q, Leica M10, M11. And it's great, beautiful, incredible. But 2 years ago, I had this weird moment where my Hasselblad was sitting on the counter. It's this beautiful object. I'd sold all of my old film cameras. It kills me. It was so stupid. I did this 7 years ago. I was in this minimalist, I got to get rid of everything I'm not touching, not using mode. And I sold them all for a song. I mean, it's heartbreaking to think about it. All these cameras I used in my early 20s are now in hopefully someone's using them. They're in a used camera shop. And I pulled the Hasselblad off the counter, and I thought, okay, let me throw a roll through this. It was kind of inspired by someone in my life. And I took it out, and it's this clunky, crazy thing, Hasselblad, the square box, and you kind of open it, and, it kind of like snaps open. And you take it out, and I took it out, and I went to some cafes, and I was like, hey, can I take your photo? And just everyone changed, the energy of everyone. When you take this thing out, you open it up, it's real. And they're like, you're shooting on film? Oh my God, this is a serious thing. Everyone kind of like, stiffened to a certain degree, but then also performed a little better. And I got those photos back, and I was like, ooh, this was fun. And then I took it on a 300-kilometer walk across England. That was the only camera I brought, was this Hasselblad. I put it on a Peak design shoulder strap snappy thing. And so I had this giant medium format camera on my pack. I looked insane. All these British people were just giving me side eye. And I shot with that in the Cotswolds, not the Cotswolds, but the Lake District and up there. I walked Wainwright's path. And I got those photos back, and I was like, holy crap, this is fun. And I liked the delay. And so as soon as I got back to Tokyo, I was like, but this thing's too big. I bought an M6. I went straight to the used camera shop, grabbed an M6, and kind of haven't turned back since then. And so the new book that's coming out on Monday called Other Thing, which is kind of there's so much complexity around this book, this peninsula for me. There's the pop-up newsletter, there's my fine art edition, there's the Random House edition, now there's this photograph-only edition responding to this edition. It's in full color. But that was shot with a Mamiya 7 II, Leica M6, and a Leica MP. And that was great to do that. And the thing I've taken away, the real thing about film that you can't deny, because there's a lot of woo-woo, but you can't deny getting the negative, which is this physical, immutable thing. Also, it's plastic. It'll probably last 1,000 years, right? It just doesn't go away. And now my life as a photographer is split into these two worlds of everything I shot before 2022 digitally, and now I have this archive, this corpus of negatives that's building up. And I'm kind of heartbroken that I didn't start earlier. So it's been an interesting emotional journey, but it's fun.
All right, I think we are over time, and Craig has some books to sign, I hope. Yeah, I'm getting the yes. Okay, where is he going to set up? What's the timing? Oh, there's the table.
Right over there.
All right, well, give Craig Mott a big hand.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.